country. And zooming in for a moment a little bit more on New York, given that's the mandate other working group, of course, we're aware there are some ad hoc site-specific conversations that have happened between utilities and developers for these multi-charger sites that have led to oversubscribing electrical connection in sort of one-off demonstrations. Again, we think that given the pace and scale, we're going to need to shift towards something that is scalable and less ad hoc, less one-off, but really provides clarity and certainty to the market, to customers, to providers, and allows the sort of at-scale benefits of these approaches to be realized. We also are well aware of the Load Management Technology Incentive Program, or LMTIP, administered by the joint utilities. And that does directly support the deployment of technologies that could be operationalized specifically to support flexible service connections. So whether that's software-based approaches, hardware-based approaches, co-located energy storage, or integrated energy storage, there are very clear eligibility guidelines on that LMTIP website that paints a picture of technology deployments that can support flexible service connection. So in that sense, a significant piece of the puzzle is really already in place in New York, and just want to take a moment to commend the joint utilities as well as the DPS staff and the PSC to the extent that they're tuned in here too, for the work they've done to establish that LMTIP and get that rolled out, because I think it will have a meaningful impact on the use of these technologies. However, there's a lack of clarity on next procedural steps to graduate from the ad hoc approach. And while LMTIP provides funding support, a lot of the other pieces of the puzzle, which we're going to jump into in the next few slides, still seem to be lacking support or clarity. And so we really want to see, and I'll come back to this later in our recommendations, but clear next procedural steps to address these topics and develop a more scalable, consistent framework that may be through the EVIIWG. We're not closed off to the idea of it being through ITWG, Grid of the Future, the EV Make Ready docket, or even a new docket if that's appropriate. I'm going to run through now some design elements, or sort of how we could envision a framework being built. This is, I guess, the skeleton around which a more holistic, flexible service connection framework can develop. First, want to note there are sort of two needs. There are certainly the immediate needs. The description on the slide here is sort of something we've seen referred in this working group and other venues as phase connection or bridge to wires, using a flexible service connection approach as an interim solution while customers await a full capacity, full connection, if an upgrade is needed. And that upgrade may take 1, 3, 5, or 5+ years. So it's don't want to mince words here. Immediate or near term could still mean 5 years or 5+ years, and doesn't necessarily mean it's for just a quick 6-month period. And then there's the long term, and we think that it's worthwhile considering the elements that I'll cover on the next few slides, given that they inform both approaches. So in terms of the technology eligibility, control architecture, and some of the other process elements that we're going to run through, those need to be figured out regardless, whether we're using this framework to address these immediate needs and this sort of phased or bridge to wires approach, or it becomes a part of a long-term solution for a given site. These elements still need to be considered and adopted in some capacity. So that's why moving forward, we're just going to kind of consistently talk about these different elements, and we do believe they apply to both immediate and long-term approaches. Regarding technology eligibility, I already mentioned the LMTIP addresses software and hardware and co-located storage. Just kind of zooming out a little bit and some broader definitions here. There's your traditional controls, relays, perhaps smart inverter settings, to the extent that's relevant if there's inverter on-site storage. probabilistic methods, sort of a historical approach that could be used. Emerging solutions like power control systems and the applicable standards under which those may be certified. Other load management solutions and software also referenced in the LMTIP eligibility section. And again, co-located generation and or storage. Regarding control architecture, this is borrowed from an implementation in another part of the country, is allowing both the autonomous localized load management approach, where there's some smarts or some capability pre-programmed or available in that sort of local site level to support flexible service connection, and then also centralized sort of communications-based load management. This may be more supportive of a dynamic approach, which we'll get into in just a moment here. In terms of the actual limit options and how a service connection would be limited and be able to oversubscribe, there's a single value limit, just static approach. There's a daily or seasonal peak versus off-peak limits. And again, we've seen this come up in other parts of the country. Same goes for 24-hour profile for each month, or a 288 value sort of envelope or profile for load. That's also been done elsewhere on the generation side and is now being considered on the load side. And then the full 8760 operating envelope. And of course, again, there's the option to have sort of pre-programmed or localized autonomous control. And there's option to have a dynamic approach with sort of central dispatch that looks a little bit more like demand response programs, but specifically for the purposes of this infrastructure deferral and avoiding need. There's also an important discussion to happen around hard versus soft caps, or firm versus non-firm import limits, whether these limits can be exceeded for a cost or whether they are absolutely not to exceed. There's also an important discussion that needs to be figured out, and I want to address that. There's probably some good discussion to come and methodologies to be developed on how to allocate capacity when there are multiple flexible connections on the same circuit. Again, in this case, we can borrow from on the generation and storage side, where these flexible interconnection topics have come up, and the methodologies that are being developed for those use cases. And lastly, but certainly not least, in fact, this is one of our areas that I think we're kind of most interested in working with this group, is the actual process. How do customers elect to use this flexible service connection approach? Are they engaged by the utility and provided with education? Are the hosting capacity maps used as a key enablement tool to elect the limit options? Is there a utility preload assessment, which we know is something that's done in New York? And then does the customer election occur? Or is there a utility-led process where maybe utility applies some sort of filter to all load requests and says, if you're over a year or some other timeline, we're going to recommend you consider this flexible service connection and provide you resources to enable that? Or is it a hybrid of the two? Are both options available? These are the sorts of things that may not be the most compelling. Not talking about incentives or some of the technical elements, but it's really the process elements that ultimately make or break the success of this approach. And lastly, ideally an ability to have some sort of in-flight site design changes as there's back and forth between the utility and the customer. The only option shouldn't be to restart a load letter or load request and go back to the drawing board. There should be an ability to sort of tweak throughout, and that should be enshrined in a framework here. I've been talking a lot. There's been a lot of text. So I'm going to run through these last items a little bit faster and looking forward to taking questions. But we also want to see transparency, reporting on, for example, how well are these approaches working? Transitioning from an ad hoc approach to like a scalable framework. Is it working? Are there areas where sort of friction or barriers remain? How are we aligning with local AHJs and permitting and National Electrical Code? which also have language around EV energy management systems or automated load management. How are we addressing compensation? Given that this is a service customers are providing to the utility, how is that savings shared across the customer, the utility, and ratepayers? Of course, there's the LMTIP technology incentive that does encourage the adoption of the technologies. And lastly, just wanted to point folks to some case studies. This is by no means the whole world of case studies or resources, but certainly some areas we can borrow for different elements moving forward. So again, just to recap our initial purpose of this, given that there are these items that need to be figured out, and given that it's not our opinion that it's insurmountable to do so, we recommend that joint utilities work with DPS staff and perhaps the PSC to, in pretty short order here, identify what the right procedural pathway is to collect evidence and adopt each element, whether that's this working group, whether that's another working group like ITWG, whether it shall be scoped in or addressed in a proceeding like the Grid of the Future proceeding, or one of the make-ready proceedings for light duty or medium heavy duty electrification. And then generally, let's start with what's simple and unambiguous. LMTIP puts New York, I think, a large step ahead in figuring a lot of this out, but these other pieces need to fall into place. With that, thank you all. And there's some additional resources as well in the appendix, including some great research from the US DOE on this topic, and it references some key international implementations that have seen great success. So happy to take questions. And with that, I'm happy to take. I see can this presentation be dropped in the chat? I believe it's uploaded on the docket page. Is that right, Lisa?
Yeah, these will be uploaded in DMM and on the EVIIWG webpage. Yep.
Thank you. And thank you, Lisa and DPS staff for providing the opportunity for VGIC to present today.
No, thank you. This was very informative and gives us a lot to think about. Really appreciate it. And with that, we will go to Cole. Are you able to present? Let's see. Yeah.
Let me get my slides up. Lisa, if you could just let me know when you can see these all right.
Yep.
All right, perfect. Hi, folks. I'm Cole Germain, attorney with Environmental Defense Fund. For those of you who don't know, EDF is a global environmental nonprofit. We have folks working on so many different issues. I don't know what all of them are, but my team in particular focuses on medium and heavy duty electrification here in the US, including in New York. And that work increasingly focuses on grid readiness, proactive planning, and making sure that fleets that are ready, willing, and able to electrify have the distribution grid capacity to do so. Earlier this week, EDF, together with IREC, Interstate Renewable Energy Council, and VGIC, submitted some joint comments in the EVIIWG docket, just making two recommendations for the EVIIWG, one of which is a recommendation specifically on the straw proposal, and one of which is a general recommendation for the EVIIWG moving forward, that I just wanted to spend a few minutes talking through today. And this is going to pair really well with what Zach just went through. So just to highlight the two recommendations, number one, for the initial queue management straw proposal that's going to be finalized this year, we're recommending that proposal include phased interconnection as a standard interconnection option for customers. And I'll get into exactly what we mean by that. And then recommendation two, we're suggesting that the work of the EVIIWG continue into next year to identify and implement flexible interconnection solutions. So what Zach was just talking through, I think we see the EVIIWG as the right venue to answer many of the questions that need to be answered to implement and scale flexible interconnection as a solution for customers. So phased interconnection, by that we mean customers are allowed a fixed maximum demand below their theoretical maximum load while the utility completes a grid upgrade. So for example, if you have a fleet charging customer that comes to their utility and says, we need 1 megawatt of capacity to charge all of our chargers. And the utility says, well, we have half a megawatt of capacity at that site. Under a phased interconnection agreement, the customer would be able to install a fixed hardware limiter that allows the customer to never exceed that half a megawatt of capacity until the utility completes a grid upgrade. So it's completely backed by a hardware solution that prevents the customer from exceeding that demand, while allowing the customer to access that demand while the grid upgrade is ongoing. And obviously this has a lot of potential for speeding interconnection for customers who would otherwise be waiting on those grid upgrades. And this can work for a lot of different types of customers in the EV space, public charging sites that are scaling their load over time, fleets that may not be ready to fully electrify their fleet. And so they're only installing a few of their chargers, or they install all of their chargers, but don't get all of the vehicles immediately. So in practice, a customer making an interconnection request that is above the available distribution grid capacity at their site would have two options when they're going through the process. They can choose to wait for the utility to complete the grid upgrades before that request is fulfilled. So what happens today, effectively. Or the second option, they can receive that partial service, the phased interconnection, up to the level of what is available on the grid now, and receive the full service once the grid upgrade is completed. So the utility would still go through, do the distribution grid work to provide that service. It's just the customer isn't waiting that entire time to receive any service. As I said, these solutions can be low tech, using available technology today. They don't require active communications systems between the utility and the customer's equipment because they can be backed specifically by a hardware limiter. And they can be implemented through process improvements alone. So as I said, this slots into the interconnection process that we've already heard the utilities walk through in earlier meetings of the EVIIWG. This is really just accessing capacity that exists today on the grid, while grid upgrades that would otherwise happen still happen. And then the last thing I'll say on this is the customer may find that receiving that partial service indefinitely is meeting their needs. If, excuse me, if it is a fleet that can do all of their charging off peak and they spread it across all of their chargers, that partial service may be completely adequate for what they need. And that's great. If the grid upgrade still happens, then that's excess capacity that can go towards other transportation electrification or other end use electrification or load growth in the area. Second, flexible interconnection. So I won't get into the details on this because I think Zach covered it really well. But effectively, customers are allowed a fixed or variable maximum demand. So it's not just a single value that doesn't change. It could be that fixed value. It can change seasonally. It can change over the course of a day, like a TOU rate, or it can actively change based on known grid conditions. And with these connections, it's not necessarily true that the grid upgrade needs to go forward as it would have happened otherwise. So that grid upgrade may be deferred, it may be downsized, it may be avoided. The utility may rethink their planning and decide, well, if we do this flexible interconnection with a customer, then we can defer the small upgrade we were going to do and combine a couple upgrades to do one more holistic upgrade in the future. So it can really allow for more holistic and cost-effective distribution system planning. So because, as Zach said, there are more questions and complications to this implementing flexible interconnection at scale, we're not suggesting that a fully fleshed out flexible interconnection proposal show up in the queue management proposal. Instead, our recommendation is that the EVIIWG's work continue following the adoption of the queue management proposal, and consider what needs to happen to implement flexible interconnection at scale. So the 4 questions that we see as we've laid them out, and you can see in our comments for a bit more details here, but 1, which forms of flexible interconnection are acceptable to customers and can be implemented by the utilities. So this gets at figuring out what customers actually want, and that will be different for different types of customers. A public EV charging site may be interested in a different solution than a private depot that wants a more firm, predictable arrangement, even if it means they may get a bit less capacity. And then what can be implemented by the utilities. Some of these solutions require communications architecture in place that some utilities have and others do not. Some of them require simpler process improvements. So we need to find that balance of what works for customers, what helps them, and what is cost effective and can be implemented by the utilities. Second, the marketing, education, and outreach that's necessary to support deployment. So these interconnection agreements are only useful if customers know about them. So how do we educate customers about what their options are so they know what will work for me, what is useful, and how do we get interconnection faster? Third, the load forecasting and system planning implications of flexible interconnection. So as I said, that once flexible interconnections are being used at a meaningful scale, they can change how utilities are thinking about distribution system needs and can defer, mitigate, or avoid some upgrades. And so I think it is incredibly useful for the EVIIWG to think about how the use of flexible interconnection arrangements should change that forecasting and planning paradigm. And then lastly, reporting. So obviously we need to know, if these are being deployed at scale, how are they impacting the system and how are they impacting customers? So, what are the specific pieces of information that the commission, staff, stakeholders, and the utilities need to know to understand the impacts that flexible interconnections are having on the system? So altogether, we think these are all appropriate things for the EVIIWG to continue working on in the new year. And we're recommending that the EVIIWG continue after the queue management straw proposal is noticed and finalized in 2025. So that's it. I will leave it there. This was a joint effort from myself, Zach at VGIC, and Mari Hernandez at IREC. So Zach and Mari, if I've missed anything, please invite you to jump in here. But yeah, if anyone else has any questions, happy to answer at this time.
I do not see any hands up for questions right now. So I think we can move forward. I think next on the docket is JU and the, yep.
Great. Hi everyone. This is Katie Zellner from Con Edison. I'm going to be representing the joint utilities today, and really just will be summarizing the changes that DPS staff asked that we make to our queue management proposal. So thanks, Lisa. Just quickly to remind you of the timeline. I think everyone's familiar with the early part of the timeline, but as a reminder, Con Edison wrote a straw proposal at the direction of the commission back in the spring. And then we went through a stakeholder comment period. We had EVIIWG meetings, and we worked with the JU to modify the proposal so that it would be applicable across the joint utilities in New York. And then where we are now is after the October meeting, where we shared what those updates were, we sent the proposal back to staff, and DPS staff reviewed and made some modifications and additional adjustments. And I am here to share out what those adjustments are today. And then at the very end of this timeline, you see in the coming months, Lisa already previewed this, but the sort of finalized version of this proposal will be filed on DMM with a notice for soliciting comments. So I think with that, yep, great, next slide. I just wanted to summarize what some of these changes were. They really fell into two categories. One was clarification on which utilities had adopted which of the proposal's best practices. And then there were also a few formatting changes that I think will make the document easier to read and digest. So starting on the top left side of this table here, there was a request that we clarify which utilities are really engaging in section 2.1, so expanding advisory services from only fleet customers to other types of make-ready customers. And we clarified that all of the joint utilities offer fleet advisory services, but only Con Edison was resourced to expand beyond fleet customers and include regular site assessments for really all customers, whether they're fleet or not. And in a similar vein, we were able to clarify utility implementation for the participant portal in this second row here. So all of the joint utilities offer a participant portal. And also we were able to clarify that all joint utilities, if you're looking at section 4.2 in the third row, all of the joint utilities are participating in the Make Ready program, share the savings, earning adjustment mechanism. And then a few formatting and organization changes were made to the table of contents. We also added a list of acronyms and abbreviations and followed the preferred formatting preference that staff uses for its filings for footnotes. So that should make everything a little bit easier to read and follow in the iteration of this version of the document. And yeah, I think we can, this was just a reminder of the modifications that were made when the joint utilities updated its proposal. So I think we can actually skip these two slides unless there are questions on what we discussed last month. Or I should say October, not last month. But yeah, any questions on what changes were made in this? I think it's the previous slide, Lisa. And one more back. Or two more back, yeah. Yeah, any questions on these changes?
I'm not seeing any hands raised, Katie.
Okay, great. Well, I will turn it back over to you, Lisa.
Thank you. So to tie it all together, we have a draft document. Zach, did you want to pull up the next slide? So, we will issue the draft straw proposal via a secretary's notice during the week of December 16th is the plan. We are giving everyone a 30-day comment period that ends January 15th to comment and provide additional edits or comments on the draft document. And then once those should be coming in, and if people, are getting notices from DMM, there'll be a reply comment to if anybody wants to reply to any of the comments that were filed from any of the parties. And we can incorporate that into the draft proposal, incorporate any of these comments. We would like the comments to be submitted through DMM because I think this is going to be a more formal, or we want this to be more formal procedure than we did in the beginning where it was kind of, informal. That way everyone can view and everything is public notice through DMM. And then on February 12th, we will hold right now a tentative EVIIWG meeting, depending on if we receive any additional comments in DMM from any party. And then after that, we can we can SAPA the document for an additional 60-day additional comment period to finalize this document. During these chances to provide comments, especially during the SAPA 60-day, I think that's when we can start bringing up the flexible interconnection, and that way the commission can make a decision on where the best venue is to address those ideas and concerns and technologies. Does anybody have any questions on this? Go ahead, Melanie. Can you unmute yourself?
Yes, I think that
Okay, good.
so is a new document going to be filed following that February 12th meeting, or is that kind of dependent on whether comments are filed in January?
It will be filed either way around February or March. It's just going to be modified prior to that filing with the comments that we receive prior to that. And then once it's filed during SAPA, of course, the commission will decide. Stephanie, are you on? Am I making sense? After it's the SAPA and we get additional comments during the SAPA period, it gets written up into the order for the commission to determine if
Right.
how to address the comments.
Okay.
Yes, that's right, Lisa. Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, yeah, I was just trying, based on these dates, was just trying to make sure I understood that there's going to be a draft proposal filed next week with an initial comment period, and then a final proposal will be filed either February or March, and then there will be the full 60-day comment period.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
We tried to do that so that, because I know that people have a lot of comments, especially, on the flexible interconnection and things like that. So we're trying to address it so that everybody in the EVIIWG has a chance to express their comments and edits and get their input into this document prior to, so that it's a full document that we can present to the commission.
And I can just add, I don't think that what the draft that will be filed on December 16th will include some changes that EVIIWG participants may not have seen until it gets filed. So that might be helpful to see that draft. And for example, like we do mention phase deployment in that draft.
Yeah, thank you. Are there any other questions on process or anything else? Do we have any other hands up? Go ahead, Mari.
Hi, thank you. I was curious about, since we haven't seen the document, are you still thinking of it in the same kind of format versus more of a procedural document? It was kind of separated into those different topic areas, but didn't read as like, you need to apply and then here's the process for that. And, how are you envisioning, I guess, how is this new, the updated proposal going to be presented?
It is a similar format, Mari, to what you
Okay.
saw before.
Okay.
Thanks, Katie.
To the extent that you think information like that is needed, Mari, it would be really helpful to put that in your comment.
Yep, we will do. And we had shared that originally too in our comments, but we do think that's important just because it's more customer facing versus utility facing.
Justin, do you have a question?
Not so much a question. If you're waiting for comments, happy to wait, but didn't want to miss the opportunity.
Nope, go ahead.
Yeah, and Justin Wilson from ChargePoint here. I'll state up front my disclaimer that I'm new and just getting up to speed on this process. I would just note, I think, you know, thinking about the utility customers, thinking about the needs of trying to get deployment expedited as quickly as possible, you know, completely understand and respect the process that we have to go through. But I just also want to make sure that everybody's well aware of the delays that we face coming up, you know, now on 2 years for several sites within the state that we still don't have cost and design information for. That is causing investors in these projects a lot of consternation. The longer we wait to get some of these issues resolved, we are going to have sites fall out of participation in programs and in installing these electric vehicle charging stations. So I just would implore everybody to work as quickly as possible, to have processes that are not necessarily linear, but are working on the same timelines and different pathways in order to resolve as many of these issues as quickly as possible. I'm just concerned that, you know, looking at this, it seems like we're not going to have actionable work to be able to roll up our sleeves and do the implementation to do for another 4 months. And I can't think of any more common sense proposals than what I heard Zach and Cole put forward, and just hope that we can begin working those as expeditiously as possible, because we are eagerly anticipating some relief on these timelines that we're facing. So thank you so much. Again, I'll just stay new to the process and certainly understand the need for process overall for protection of all the parties, but we need to move as quickly as we can.
Thanks, Justin. I'm not seeing, does anybody have anything else that they want to raise? I'm not seeing any other hands. Okay, so for upcoming, recent upcoming events, just look for the notice soliciting the comments, and we will take all your comments and adjust the document as we receive them. And thank you so much for everyone for participating, and have a happy and safe holiday. Thanks.